Welcome to Artemancer, a Latinx art and culture podcast. I am your host, Mauricio Ramirez. In today's episode, we feature an interview with Kiara Aileen Machado, who is a Latinx visual artist of Guatemalan and Salvadoran descent. Her artwork has been exhibited in museums and galleries across the United States and internationally, including the cities of Florence, Frankfurt, Berlin, Paris, and San Salvador. Join us as we explore how her Central American heritage inspires her paintings and visual art. I'm here with Kiara Aileen Machado. And Kiara, I was wondering, where are you located and what current projects are you working on?
I'm currently in Southern California. Just recently got back from Guatemala a couple days ago, so kind of settling in back into being here and being in the studio and reflecting on my time at the artist residency that I did in Guatemala. And currently I am most definitely thinking about my time there, and I did some quick pieces there, but kind of just letting that kind of sit and thinking about it and thinking about like future pieces. And as well, I'm also working on a body of work that's also reflective of my recent travels, which I've been traveling every month for a good part of this past year, except for November. But some of those travels were to Honduras and Cuba, and then obviously recently now Guatemala. So this new body of work is definitely reflective of my time in each of those countries.
Okay, awesome. Could you let us know what you were doing recently in Guatemala?
Yeah, so in Guatemala, I was doing an artist residency called Gracia. That's run by Mafed, who's also Guatemalan. It was just a really amazing experience because I haven't been able to go back to Guatemala since 2011. So, and also I was a teenager at that point, so still very much old enough to remember and have these memories. But it was nice to, after so long, to be able to go back, one, like by myself and also for art. So just really thankful that, and seeing after like so many years of working with art now, how like my art is able to take me to new places or take me back to new places or back to places that I've been to. So it was definitely, I was in Antigua the whole time, and it was definitely nostalgic to kind of walk around, get to the center, and, you know, have these like memories come back to me of like, I remember like eating rellenitos right there, you know, with the family, or seeing this church, or, you know, being able to see the volcano every day was like, I don't know, for the first 2 days, I was kind of tired, but I think it was like by the third day, and also, right, like you're seeing the volcano, you know, different lighting, and also like some days it's like super clear, and other days, you know, the clouds are in front of it. So I don't know, for the first 2 days I was like in a daze or something, did not see the volcano at all. And then like one of the days I think I was just stopped just to kind of like take a breath or thinking about where to go, and then like it was like the perfect view of the volcano, and I was like, oh my gosh, the volcano's right there, what the heck, like how did I not even see it? So also thinking about that, like, yeah, of course, how could you not be inspired by volcanoes, you know, or even being a part of the diaspora of so much work, so much poetry, books, like artwork, being inspired by such like beauty and just the magnitude of it too, right? So I think all of that was very nice to have those couple of weeks to really kind of settle in, right? It didn't ever really become a norm because at times I was like turning a corner and I was like, oh my gosh, like the volcano, you know, or like cropping it in different ways in a picture, in a photograph, you know, next to like, you know, cars, and then it's like the volcano. And then of course always, you know, the colors of the houses, the flowers, everything, the cobblestones, which I had to like focus on walking and not look up because yeah, I couldn't just like look up and like be walking. So definitely like walking and then stopping, looking, and then like continue to focus on the floor. But it was a very beautiful experience to be able to go back for an artist residency.
Yeah, to connect back to similar, like if I were to share the story, it's like going back to El Salvador. My parents are from El Salvador. And I remember going as a kid and then returning. Maybe I was in I was in college, and that became like such a big moment for me when I returned, and that was in 2009. And yeah, how much everything has changed, but you're also older, so you pay attention to other things. Like, so
Yeah.
the volcano for me became also something very sort of central, like thinking about, wow, the geography of this place is just so different than, San Francisco. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's like small things that you notice that are just, yeah, I mean, it's a completely different country, right? So yeah, I sort of, I understand that feeling. It's also exciting, right? To go back to your homeland, or,
Yeah.
maybe our parents' homelands, to sort of reconnect and discover this whole other side of our own family histories that are just like not, on our day to day, everyday sort of basis. So
Yeah.
sharing that, I do want to ask about your origin story. So, how did you get into painting? Was there a moment as a child or adolescent or, youth where you said, this is a moment where, I want to go into painting, or just an inspirational moment that you got sort of sucked in, like I think a lot of artists, into their art form, into their craft? If you could share a story around that.
Yeah. I do remember like my parents, they definitely did take us to art museums when we were younger. And one of my oldest sisters is 7 years older. So, but even before then, I think they would take us just to go as like a day, like free day at a museum and stuff. But I do remember like my older sister having to like go to museums, and we'd all just like make it a trip. And then, so that was also really nice, that my parents, I remember one time like I think it was maybe LACMA, and the painting was like suspended by like strings. It wasn't nailed to the wall, and it might have been like an impressionist painting or something with like really thick painting. And my dad almost got in trouble because he was like trying to show me like, look at the side, like look at from the side because it's like so textured, and we're like looking, and I think we were like getting too close to the other painting. But I have that particular memory of like yeah, appreciative that like they were also willing to like take us to art museums whenever they could. It wasn't like all the time, but I do remember like that being a thing, or them like being open to like going to museums. But even before that, I do remember being in kindergarten and saying that I wanted to be an artist, um, not knowing what that meant, but I was like, I was like, this is what I want to do. And then like, also being like, oh, I don't know what that means. And then like
Mm.
changing it to like a nurse, a doctor. But I like always knew I wanted to be an artist. Didn't know what that meant, didn't know what that looked like because I didn't have anybody in the family that was like, at least back then that I knew of, right? Like a living artist that was doing art, as opposed to like knowing like all these artists that we all know that are, dead, right? Like, so I was like, I didn't even think of art as being like you're living, you can be doing it and making like a living off of it. Up until when I was like way later in college, even when I was in community college, I remember still like wanting to do the arts, but like still being scared of one, income, and like two, I'm like, oh, man, my parents crossed borders for me to be painting. Like, what? So that was also kind of like a conflict within myself of being like, this has to be worth it. I have to be like, like really be good at it, or it has to be really good. But even then, I just didn't know that you could be a living artist. And then I was like, just whatever. I'm gonna do it, and we're gonna see what happens. And I do one of the pivotal moments that I do remember being like, oh, okay, I can do this. Was when I saw the works by Kerry
Mm.
James Marshall, and this was way later. Like coming across his work, I think I was already at Cal State Long Beach. So I think I was like still very much like, okay, I'm gonna do it, but I don't know, still finding like my grounding as an artist and like how to execute what I wanted to. I was like still experimenting with like how I wanted my work to look like and just figuring that out. And I've always loved like impressionism and fauvism, but it was still very much so for like aesthetic, right? Like, the texture and the color really draws me. But other than that, the meaning behind it, it's like an impression of something. It didn't really I couldn't really connect on it on like a deeper level, or like there was really like nothing like since the initially seeing it and then like reading about it that I was like, oh wow, it was just more so like aesthetically, like really love texture and all that. And then finally, when I came across Kerry James Marshall, like since the beginning of seeing his work and then reading about it, it like all made sense. And I was like, oh, okay, so you can make work about this, of like, I get it. Like, I get this work. And I can connect to it. And I think that was like my fear beforehand, because I was like, am I just really like that bad of an artist that I'm seeing all this like fine art, all this art that like is like instantly respected, and I'm just not getting it? Like, I don't know. And I think like at times with certain artists, like I would kind of force myself, to be like, yeah, I guess like I like it, right? But then like learning about them, I'm like, oh no, what? So yeah, I think with Kerry James Marshall was a really pivotal moment of being able to see his work, instantly fall in love with it, and also like loving, when he would go on interviews and say things like, Andy Warhol, his work does nothing for me. I don't like it. I don't care for it. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so you can like not like these like white artists that are like, everybody thinks is amazing, and and it's okay to say like, no, I don't like it, don't get it, don't like it, it does nothing for me. So I think that like he's done a lot for me, of just being able to like look at his work, read his interviews, and it goes like so much depth. I think that's what just a well-rounded artist for myself, that I'm like, oh, okay. It's very comforting, and I'm like, okay, I can do it.
So yeah. Talking about Kerry James Marshall, I mean, that to me also speaks sort of volumes of representation, right? Because when I encountered Kerry James Marshall, there was something that just resonated as well when I saw his work. And the fact that he was kind of breaking sort of norms, at least when it was taught to me, like, that he was using actual color black for his paintings to represent Black African-American people, right? And I thought that was also like breaking the rules, right? I thought you weren't supposed to use black, because I was also trained as an artist, and it's like always use some other shade and mix it with black, or never use like pure black to represent the color black. And yeah, it's a lot more rich depending on how you use it. But I like how direct Kerry James Marshall is in terms of his representation, and maybe being, in a sense, being so literal with that color of black, right? And it's like, it's also a statement, but it's so, it's like breaking, to me, it was like breaking the rules, right? And so I think that's sort of the beauty with art, is that we don't have to sort of fit these norms that come about, and usually they're sort of Eurocentric norms, right? That come back from like years of training and, wherever, whoever taught in these academies and whatnot. And so that sort of just gets passed down, right? I'm sort of not surprised that you're interested in Kerry James Marshall's work, because I think he's one of, the great artists of our time. Yeah, in that sense, I resonate too with, I'm a fan of Kerry James Marshall. Okay, so college was sort of a moment where you were deciding, I can go into this being an artist. Was there a moment where you sort of just launched yourself? I mean, I would assume after graduating, right? Where you realized this is what I want to do, and this is sort of the path I'm going to take? Or was there like, because some people, sort of dabble into it and maybe have another career or aspiration. So I'm just curious about how you were able to sort of go through that journey.
I definitely decided before graduating, because I had to transfer to university. So right there, obviously, since I was like going to transfer for my major, and I was like, oh, okay, I have to like decide. But I think it was, that's why I appreciate going to a community college first, because it did give me that time to get my general eds out of the way, and also have that time to like think. Because I feel like if I would have gone from high school into university, I probably would have like switched majors. I would have gone in for maybe like another reason, maybe like done art major as like an undergrad or something, or like another bachelor's or something. But it definitely did give me that time to kind of work through the careers that I most definitely didn't want to, but was considering. Because before just like fully investing in being an artist, I was trying to find ways of how I could be involved with the arts without, I don't know, still it being like a
Hmm.
respectable quote unquote career. So I was like, maybe art
Hmm.
therapy. Maybe people would like, understand that. And then people still didn't understand that. And then I didn't even understand it because I was like, oh, like, but I was trying to like research online, and at least for myself, it was kind of hard. Or there was like, maybe like one program, and then another program was like, no, you do them both separately. And then my middle sister is a therapist, and she was like, I think you just be taking psychology classes like what I did. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. So I think that was a deciding factor, because like I cannot go back to. And then at that point, because I was closer to graduating, I was already beginning to take art classes. So I had taken like intro classes, and was like taking more like 2D classes or like color theory. So I was already kind of getting used to, these longer classes, right? Like 3 hour classes or like 2 hour classes. But it was definitely very much so like it's not a
Hmm.
lecture, right? You go in, you work, you're like on your own. So I was already getting way too used to like this format of like an art class. And I was like, man, like going back to like a lecture, sit in lecture, I don't think I can do that. And I don't even think I could like, I just wouldn't be invested in it. I would not be happy. And I think that was a deciding factor when my sister was like, yeah, I think you just be doing what I'm
Hmm.
doing. So I was like, oh no. So then I think that's when I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. We're gonna find out. And yeah, I just decided to apply for the drawing and painting program at Cal State Long Beach. And yeah, and then even then, right, like once I transferred, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And then I think right there, I was already kind of beginning to do like vending
Hmm.
as art, right? Like selling my art, like my prints and stuff. So I was already kind of doing that. So I was already kind of like trying to like figure out or doing like little projects here and there, like commissions and stuff. So it definitely was growing into, deciding to be an artist. And I didn't even start calling myself an artist until I graduated Cal State Long Beach, because I was like proud at that moment of the work that I was producing. Because I was painting, but I felt like my pieces at that point were like mediocre. Like it wasn't anything good up until like my two last pieces from when I graduated. And that's where I was like, oh, okay, this is good. Now I feel like I've earned that respect to call myself an artist.
Yeah, I mean, in similar fashion, I did undergrad in painting and drawing as well, and so I was able to, like exactly what you were saying. I was like, I'm also just not taking those lecture classes, right? That seem really long and boring. But often I had to obviously take some of them because I had
Yeah.
general ed, and but it's a whole different experience to be 3 hours in a studio, right? Painting,
Mm-hmm.
drawing, and just talking with other artists and peers. I think there's something there that you're just in the presence with other sort of creative people,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're creating art together. It's definitely an experience like I don't forget, and I sort of wish I could continue.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's such a. I mean, and I'm sure other majors and probably have other sort of like I'm thinking about the sciences, like they often have
Mm-hmm.
sort of labs. So like those experiences to me are just precious, right? Of being sort of undergrad, exploring, your art form. And I was wondering, in doing that, were you sort of drawn to a certain medium, as when you're going through your program, did you see yourself sort of gravitating towards, a certain medium?
Yeah. Um, I feel like I definitely, once I got to Cal State Long Beach, it was already like
Okay.
oil
Yeah.
paints, for myself, that I was like, oh, I love this. But I think that going through community college, I remember one of my intro, I think it was just like intro drawing or something. And I did appreciate that professor, because she like encouraged us to try different mediums. I think literally every assignment that we had, it was a different medium. And I think that, especially because I was at the beginning of me kind of taking art classes, I did appreciate that. Because if not, then, even if I don't really work with watercolors, like I've worked with them.
Hmm.
But yeah, I remember like pastels. I didn't do oils then because I don't think I had them, but it was just, yeah, it was just a drawing class. And then Once I started to go through, and then that's where I also learned how to work with gouache through like water color theory. And then I think like my last two courses were like, one was like an intro to oil painting, and that's when I was like, oh, okay, like I really, it was kind of hard, right, like at the beginning, right, and also expensive, buying everything. But it was also I think having that comparison between acrylic, right, that dries really fast, which that was all that I had worked with, and then compared to like oils that take a long time to dry, and also I can like leave my brushes with like the paint on them, and I don't have to clean them that day or like come back to it. So I think that was also like that reliability of like, oh, I can take my time with them. That I've just really become accustomed to and like really relied on that. But I just really love oil, specifically like oil on canvas. But now having worked with that for so long, that I am also like kind of getting like a longing for like going back to, or like experimenting more with dry mediums, which thankfully again too for with the artist residency in Guatemala, that I wasn't able to take oil paints, right? Because I was like, how am I can't pack that, I can't work on an oil painting, bring it back, it's not, it doesn't make sense. So I really wanted to take advantage of the time there to like work with all this medium that I've had for years that I haven't even touched. So I took, my pastels, my gouache that I do tend to work with, but it's more so like, I have the setup of my oil paints, and then to like also switch mentalities into like a different drying process and like how it's going to look different, like texture wise. So it was definitely nice to remember like, oh, I really do love like, working with all this other stuff. But I think that with oils, just because I'm so comfortable with them, that I'm also like, okay, I have these shows coming up. This is how, I already have like, oh, I can like finish this painting like this, versus like having time and space to experiment, or like, have that time to like, oh, okay, I worked on that for a little bit, don't like it, so now I can work on another thing. But now being back and from all these like traveling and so long of working with oil paints, I'm definitely still working with oil paints, but now looking into working with like other mediums as well.
That's good to hear. So yeah, I was just curious because my sort of entry point to seeing your work, right, is through seeing your paintings. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I saw your paintings in real life before I even saw you on social media because of Acción Latina, your show at Acción Latina, at the Juan R. Fuentes Gallery. And maybe I had seen your social media or not, but once I actually saw in person your paintings, I was struck by how thick you went with the paint, with the oil paint specifically, right? That's just something that's always sort of attracted me, of seeing like the thickness and really seeing the brush strokes, because there's different styles of painting, right? But to see sort of where the brush stroke is going, and you can only really achieve that, at least in oils, with sort of that thick coverage. So that's something I've always sort of liked about your work, and it's also very sort of loose in a sense that. But it's very colored based. So like for you, like I've noticed that the color really makes the contrast. So you don't need like super graphic lines, because it's already sort of there when I see, the shades and the different shades you put on, your figures. And so, yeah, I'm just amazed of how you use the oils, and also I guess the color. So I guess it wouldn't really matter what medium, but I do like that they, you go really sort of thick with the paint. But I also like sort of these highlights that you do, and I know you do them intentionally, because you often focus on them. At least when I see your photos on Instagram, where you use this sort of highlighter color. I don't know if there's like a name or technique for that, but could you talk to me about why you decide to do that, or like what attracts you in terms of doing that?
Yeah, I see that as like sewing my pieces together, as also paying homage to the other artists that they probably wouldn't call themselves artists, but I view them as artists in my family. So in particular with that, I think also one, it's like, it's where I also want to, where I kind of feel like my paintings are getting flat. And also I know like they're not, but it's just like in my mind, I'm like, I need a little something here. to like draw attention, to like certain
Yeah,
spots, or like
right.
also like I like how the viewer comes into it, and like the viewer's eyes like going through my work. But also in the sense of them being like sewn together, as like paying homage to my grandma who's sewn on her all her
Mm,
life. So I'm also thinking of like, right, because normally when I start a painting with figures, I'll draw, or I'll like sketch them in first with that like intense color, right, cadmium red,
mm,
or like a really bright yellow green. And also, it's like bringing back the linear structure, right? Of like showing what was there, like the foundation of it, and bringing it back on top as like
mm,
paying homage to antecedents and the lineage of all these artists that have been working before me, and now I'm able to call myself an artist, or I'm able to be an artist for the sake of being an artist, right? My grandma has also really loves to sew, but she was sewing for back in Wate too, right? Like in a factory of like just like sewing for hours,
mm.
right? So also like how I view my work as like, yeah, I am tend to paint about deeper subject matter, but also I'm still painting, like I'm very much enjoying, what I'm doing. And also seeing, other folks that within our family that work with, just what they have, or only do like one or two paintings, and it's not like their main focus because, you still have to think about living and surviving. So definitely paying homage to that of like bringing back the linear structure, and also paying homage to my lineage of artists within the family.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's a deeper meaning, like, because my thought was, I was like, I think most artists, when they do something like that, it's like, or like a highlight, it's because kind of like what you said, like you want artists, or you want your eye to sort of go or focus there. And it gives this pretty lovely contrast. I only know because I did it by accident once, and then it was up for critique. And people loved the
Yeah.
fact that I left like this orange sort of thing on a thumb. It was like up close of a hand, and the thumb was just had this orange, and it was totally by accident. But like whoever like was critiquing it just loved it, and I was like, and then now that I don't really, I never like followed up in doing that sort of paint. But then I saw your paintings, and I was like, oh, it reminds me of that, and you
Yeah.
incorporate it in a lot of your paintings. So yeah, that's really sort of beautiful to say that you also incorporate it because of your grandma, right? It's like thinking of homage to our ancestors, and it made me think of myself. Like my grandma as well was she was an artist. I didn't know this until later. Like she actually went to art
Right.
school. I think she met a lot of prominent Salvadoran artists that were also in the art school with her, like Camilo Minero and.
Wow.
She'll like name. I mean, she used to name. I mean, she passed away, but she passed away like I think like a year ago. And she just remained as like a costurera, right? Somebody who does costuras, and she would sell at the mercado, what she made. And she was always getting textiles. And I remember she would go to Guatemala specifically to go get the textiles
Yeah.
and then come back. And in those trips, usually my dad was with her, or my tia, tell these stories of like how she would take these trips to Guatemala and then come back with all this like material, right, to make costuras.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, my art, it's kind of funny because my art story also begins there. Like I was always thinking about where does this art sort of, I don't see my parents like creating art like, and they're never like, I saw my dad actually draw something once, and he did it really good. Like I think he drew a dinosaur, like he copied it from just looking at it. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool looking dinosaur. And then that's the only time I've ever seen him create artwork. So, but as a kid, you're like, oh, my parent has skill. My dad has skill. But then I realized I was like, oh, it's because of my grandma. Like my grandma has this sort of eye for detail and, just working with your hands. But I feel like it's kind of curious to me to think about like our own lineages. And sometimes we don't know, like, what if a couple years, decades, generations back, like we had an artist, and we just didn't know,
Right.
That's cool to know that you can trace it. But it's,
Yeah.
I really sort of connect with that, thinking about, our lineages and where we come from, and sort of our artistry lineage.
Yeah, yeah, because my grandma also embroiders. I remember when I was younger. I mean, sometimes like she'll still do it, but she'll ask me to like draw her flowers, and then she'll like embroider
Oh,
it.
cool.
But I'll ask her too, right? Like, what type of flower do you want? And she'll tell me. But yeah, it's definitely very beautiful, and just like hearing her talk like about yeah, like design or something, or she's like, do you need me to like fix anything? Like this looks good, but this doesn't. And also, yeah, just like having that skill of like be able to like see a dress and not have the lechura, not have the mold, and like being able to do it from scratch.
Right.
So yeah, just definitely seeing that artistry, and like I feel like sometimes they don't really see it in that way. It's just like it's just like work, or like, oh, I enjoy it. Um, Even though it is very much like, yeah, it's just so beautiful. Yeah, just, and also like beautiful now that she's older, she's like still able to do it, and like having that time to pass the time. And you're like, oh yeah, I have like 3 projects right now. I want to finish them, or like it's very nice, very beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's a very creative, especially like just seeing like for example, like my grandma. Yeah, just she was getting older, but I saw that that's what the one thing she continued to do was make dresses, and she even made some for Carnaval. She would make some for my tia is in like a Fogo. I forgot the name of it. It's like a Brazilian dance group for Carnaval, and she would make all the dresses for them, and
Wow.
she just continued with that, right? And even when I would have something like ripped or like something I needed, costuras,
Yeah.
she would do it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't think about it. Like, I don't know how they think about it. They might not think about it as art necessarily, right? But it definitely is like you have to have an eye and knowledge, right?
Yeah.
To do it and sort of envision, and it takes years of practice because it doesn't come easy. So
Yeah.
I was curious to talk about a little bit more maybe about your own sort of heritage and thinking about how that informs your work. So I know you're part Guatemalan and part from El Salvador, right? I was wondering how that informs your paintings, and if sort of the iconography of these countries, or maybe like a more holistic Central America, right? I know Central America, we often sort of say this word, but it is sort of encompassing 7 countries, right? But I was wondering how that sort of Central American identity informs your paintings and your art in general.
Yeah, it definitely, I think starting with the color palette definitely has a huge role, right? Of even the recuerditos, that we've always, had around the house, the textiles, right? That have like 20 different colors. And I think that's where also I definitely draw a lot of inspiration, where it's like all my colors are like a saturation, or like to the max, right? Like almost not straight out of the tube, or like sometimes when I'm bringing back the linear structure, sometimes it is straight out of the tube. But I think that one, it's like definitely the color palettes that are just very normal to see, right? In like a embroidered pillowcase that, it's like 3 magentas, right? It's like nice opaque, like pastel pink. Then it's like a magenta and like quintessential red, right? It's like very vibrant. So I think that just like naturally transfers over into my work. But then also, as far as like with a lot of the botanicals that I use, and like also thinking about like religion and how like certain days are used, like let's say like processions, right? Where my family's Catholic, and just having heard of processions, or like how even like my parents would say like, oh, for Christmas we would put palm leaves on the floor as like a decoration, right? We didn't have things to decorate, but that's how we would like just throw like, or separate them and just throw them. You have the smell, but you like do different designs, or like you would spray water on their floor, and like depending on how you sweep was a design. So all these things like of their memories that I would pull from, and that's why I think it was also really cool having the opportunity to go to Guatemala, that there just so happened to be a procession going on in front of our house. So it was kind of surreal of like having heard it and then like seeing it, like literally like the start of it, right? Like fireworks being thrown at your door and like, okay, that's attention. And then like the bright lights where it was like, it was at night, but it was so bright, it looked like day. And then like seeing the kids also like underneath the actual like platform of it, and like just their conversations, right, of just bypassing like, no, hombre, tú jálalo, or, you know, just like these little things that I wouldn't normally like get, right, or like different ways of having the experience being said. So all these things that I draw in the composition of my work, right? Like in some of my earlier work that you got to see in my solo show, right, of the palm leaves kind of being like stacked like this, and then like seeing it when they're like laying it out on the floor, right? Of like seeing the point of reference in person. And like how I've transferred that into my composition. So definitely having all these like layers of natural ways of how things compose themselves in nature, and also like how folks compose them, you know, in honoring or respecting or remembering someone. So yeah, there's, I think, definitely different elements of like either religion, spirituality, just culture, that really take a role into how it's gone into whether like I knew the deeper meaning of it, or now that I'm older, like I'm able to research more, and now even for the future of like thinking of like how I can like further develop that. But yeah, definitely amazing to have, because Guatemala and El Salvador were much more obviously present because that's where my parents are from, but then my great grandmother from my mom's side was from Honduras, but we didn't really grow up with like obviously that culture. But also having the opportunity to have gone to Honduras a couple months ago, it was also nice to have, also again, you know, it's within Central America, so the familiarity of like the same things, right, plátanos and foods, and like also certain slang words, you know, and like learning other things. So that was also very beautiful to also think about, like, that's not too far removed, you know, it's just like two, right, my mom, my grandma, and then it's my great grandmother. But how much, like, I didn't know too much about like Honduran culture, to now like have had the opportunity to also go there and then like create work as well, and collaboration, because I did a mural out there with some youth there too.
In Guatemala?
In
Oh, in
Honduras.
Honduras. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you could talk a little bit more about sort of your connection with traveling and presenting your work. I know you in the beginning you said Cuba, you'd also been to Cuba, and how has that impacted your work? You know, just traveling and exhibiting or creating with community.
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot of time for reflection, because each visit was for different reasons. Of course, I was always like making work. I always take my sketchbook with me just to have something to take notes, or I think again, right, of like sometimes when we would be, because for Honduras and Cuba, I went on a delegation. Both delegations were focused on different things. So for Honduras, you know, we met up with land defenders. There's a lot of, you know, the issues with the African palm oil. So, like, how devastating it's been because of the, you know, water, the amount of water that they use. So, there's a lot of drought. And LGBTQIA defenders. We went to some like art collectives, right? So, that was, and then also talking about like femicides and hypermilitarization. So, that was a very intense delegation. And then after that, I went to Roatan to be with for a couple days with Wagerale, which is a Garifuna community, and they've been there since before Honduras was Honduras. So that was also very thankful and privileged space, just to even like a humbling experience, to be even let in, right? You know, how we also go, like, are able to move in and out of these spaces, and also like the harm that we can cause, you know, like our own bodies, like coming into Afro-Indigenous, and what that means, and like what that conversation and dialogue can look like. So that was a very beautiful experience too, because they had also just been attacked like a few months ago by the police, and you can like see the remnants, like they had burned everything down. So also like really seeing, you know, all these phrases that we say, right? Water is life, but like really seeing when like, oh, okay, water is precious. Like it takes a mission to like, or it's like really hard to get like water from down there to up here. You have to really plan it. There was no electricity, like, right. So all these elements that go into it. So it was, and then after that, I went to meet with the collective that I was going to do the collaborative mural with. So that was a long, hard trip where I felt like I really can't really think about everything that we've been listening to and been a witness to and been a part of, because I can't. I just don't want to do it right now. It's a lot. It's a lot. And then compared to Cuba, which was another delegation. Both these delegations were a part of Witness for Peace, but this one was more on like healing our land and healing ourselves. So that was, I already knew going in, it was going to be a completely different experience. So, and we also met up with some artist collectives, went to museums, but also just like, yeah, like seeing the differences in like the heaviness of one, and then the other one, obviously like knowing that it wasn't going to be as intense as Honduras, but it was definitely very much appreciated again of like being able to go into countries and not just, again, it's also nice to go as like, lax and tourism, but it's also like, I think for myself important to not just to travel for the sake of traveling, but to actually be learning and unlearning and be a part of like these movements or want to learn more about it, which is what's inspiring this new body of work of those different experiences. And then, Guatemala was a different experience too, because it was, an artist residency. So there I was like able to have downtime. And I think maybe that's why like the first few days I like, my body was just like, you're tired. You're not going to be doing a whole lot. So yeah, of just seeing with each country what those experiences were like, and like how my body also, kind of like went through that, and also like what my work is going to look like, and also how to balance of not profiting off of or attempting to not profit or do it in a manner where it's like, oh, so sad of this, like trying to find a good balance between making work on certain experiences and also certain experiences leaving them as those experiences and cherishing them as that, and not
right.
Yeah, not profiting off of certain traumas.
Cool. Yeah, I'm always just sort of amazed of how how it feels to travel, right? One, and then going outside of the U.S. somewhere where we're, comfortable, because we know, and this is sort of our home, but going to Latin America or other countries, can really sort of open our eyes to other injustices or other causes that for us, we sort of take for granted right here in the U.S. So thank you for sharing that. I was wondering, and I bring this up in part because this is a project that I worked with Fatima Ramirez, my partner, and Josue Rojas, who's a Salvadoran born American artist. And we worked on this project, or we curated, the three of us co-curated, I guess, this show, Caravana, Mobilizing Central American Art from 1984 to the present. And that was at Soma Arts Culture Center here in San Francisco, which is, Soma Arts is like, or Soma, sorry. The name Soma Arts comes from, because it's located at the south of Market. So for those who don't know, that's why it's called Soma Arts. But it was a group show, right? We included a lot of Central American artists, and our aim was really to get up and coming artists. So artists that probably were not as well known. But we also had a mix of, just artists in general of Central American descent. And then we also had artists that were in solidarity with Central America. And that was sort of my contribution to the project. But I was fascinated by your work, and I think you had already exhibited, if I'm not mistaken, at the Juan R. Fuentes Gallery before the show. So yeah, that was an interesting show because it was the pandemic, and the pandemic hit as we
Yeah.
were preparing for it. So it became, I mean, it was still a group show, and it was thankfully still shown in person. I mean, there was limited access, so not
Hmm.
everyone could go. I mean,
Hmm.
this was 2021, I believe, sort of the beginning of 2021. I believe it was March. And yeah, I was really thankful that you were part of it. I was curious, how was your participation in that? And why did you choose the pieces that you chose to show? And I know it was quite the stretch too. If you could also talk about bringing those pieces up, because I know, you're located in LA or Southern California, and I know that you brought the pieces all the way up to San Francisco. So if you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I have a soft spot for the Bay. I think especially, first having my solo show there, and that was my first time showing outside of SoCal within California. And also with the solo show, right? Like there's more, it's just like the unknown of like, oh, will people show up? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, if anything, like whoever shows up, fine, but still like, I hope like people show up.
Right.
And it was just really great. There's like a lot of folks that came from
Mm.
SoCal to up north, and that was really sweet. And also, I had some friends who were from around the Bay, and also just like folks that I didn't know, obviously, who like heard about the show and wanted to go. So it was just a very, it felt very nice to see like a wide spectrum of folks of like some folks I knew, other folks I didn't know. Yeah, so that was yeah, I just felt very supported having my solo show there, and then obviously being later on being a part of the group exhibition. And I think during that time too, right, it was something to definitely look forward to because there was also I think right a lot of the shows had been moved to online, which is
Hmm.
great, but it's still like it's not the same
Yeah.
as being able to be in person. So I was just super thankful to even be able to have those pieces installed in person and then like see everything put up. So that was, I think it's just like very much more like exciting just to be able to be in a space, and especially for the context of that show of how important it was. And it always like is just I don't know, it just like fills my heart whenever there's an exhibition filled with Central American artists and from the diaspora or like Caribbean. That is just so important, right? It was like something that I longed for as a child, and then to be a part of that as an adult, like I never imagined, like I would get so excited like going to a museum or gallery and it was like anybody from Central America. Like, I'd get so excited and just focus on that, even if like sometimes I didn't understand the work, but I was like, ah, love it, because it was just
Right.
like this, just a longing for it. So to be able to be in a space filled with Central American artists and also from like different years, different spaces in their artist career, and just to see what everybody is covering, like this, the subject matter, I think has always interested me. What is like everybody else like painting about? So that was just really beautiful to see. And yeah, it was, thankfully we have a truck. So, we are able to, wrap it up. And I think at that time, it wasn't raining. So I think that worked out
Hmm.
perfectly.
Hmm.
But yeah, thankfully my mom and my oldest sister went with me. So it's like, definitely we got it like secured. I think I was more so nervous of like me, when we were like, taking down the pieces, like for me to properly ratchet strap everything in, but it made it safely there and safely back. But yeah, one of the pieces that I did do was a triptych, which is called Quita Mis Penas 1, 2, and 3. And they're relatively big. I don't remember the dimensions, but it's maybe like 30 by 86 or something like that. Um, but with those pieces, it was also kind of like a slow transition from like warm to cool palette.
Mm.
And um, in each panel, there was a worry doll that was in each one. So it was also kind of thinking of like me and my sisters as we're three, and wanting it to work together or be right as a collective together strong enough, but also like if you were to see them independently, that they would also stand alone, just be as a strong as a piece on their own as they are like all together. But yeah, I really enjoyed, right? Because I was like just having all that time as like studio time. I took the pandemic more so as studio time.
Yeah.
So to be able to like work on those pieces and then actually be able to take them, you know, to the location and be able to see the pieces, and to work with y'all again. And yeah, it was just a very special exhibition that I'm glad that was able to take place even during the pandemic.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I was glad you're a part of it. I didn't know that. So the Juan Fuentes show, or the Acción Latina Juan R. Fuentes Gallery, that was your first solo show,
My first solo show,
or not?
I have to check. Let me see. It was my first solo show outside of Southern
Okay. Okay.
California,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it might have been my first solo show. Okay, no, I had it was my third one. I had like two smaller ones here in LA.
Okay. But that's still significant, right? Because it's outside of, sort of your home base,
Yeah.
up north, in San Francisco. So yeah, that's still, and I didn't go to the show because I remember, like, I don't know why I couldn't make it. But yeah, Fatima told me that it was great, and I was able to see the work afterwards. And I was, again, that's, I think my introduction to you was just seeing them in person. And I was so fascinated again by seeing, all of your work. And you mentioned something about the worry dolls, and I sort of wanted to go into this because that was sort of my introduction to you too. Was I remember Fatima was explaining to me about the worry dolls, and I don't know if they're used very much in El Salvador, like, or any other country in Central America. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't done my research, but yeah, I was just curious why you incorporate the worry dolls, and if there's, sort of a deeper significance to incorporating the worry dolls in your work. And I don't know if you're continuing to do worry dolls, or if they appear, sometimes kind of surprised. But yeah, if you could speak about the worry dolls.
Yeah. So the first painting that I finished when I felt comfortable enough to like be or call myself an artist, I use the worry dolls and just like the other elements of like the botanicals in there. So I feel like all these elements that compose that piece, which is my piece that was called Cuarenta, it was just everything made sense. I felt confident about everything. I had planned everything, and everything had meaning. So at that stage of my artist career, I definitely used the worry dolls as stand-ins. About talking about Central American erasure. So I really loved that these worry dolls are so tiny, right? Thinking about Central America and how like small we are, but how like resilient and we're like still there, right? And so that's how I paralleled using the worry dolls, and also like their significance, right? They take on your worries overnight, and again thinking about just continuously drawing parallels between the worry dolls and Central America of like, and also how like the U.S. has intervened so much or has taken apart so much within Central America, but also all these like devastations that Central America continuously endures, but still like very rich culture, still very much, and wanting to get to that point of not just surviving but living, enjoying life. So I really liked like having this like a small tiny doll. Sometimes it can be really tiny, maybe like 2 inches tall, and then with Central America that being so small and like taking on so much, but still being very much vibrant and vivid, and using those, very much thinking about using the worry dolls in that sense. And at the body of work that I was creating at that time too, right? Like I would obscure them or camouflage them, and
Yeah.
thinking also about like being in this space of existing, but not really having our identities validated or questioned, or us becoming like a monolith or like being put under this umbrella. And so I very much used those worry dolls, as well as like just like the muñecas that you get in like Guatemala, and I'm sure different like places in Central America, but trying to find these things that are very that you can pinpoint, right? Like pass by and be like, that's familiar to this, or like that's from here. And that's what I wanted, is like something that was unequivocally from somewhere. And so I did, for a couple of years, I incorporated them, but I also, for now, I haven't really used them, just in the sense of like, I don't want to overuse them where they just become like a pattern, or like
Right.
they just become meaningless, and it's not as like it's expected, you know, because also like wanting to respect, you know, that they are indigenous or made by indigenous women. Of also like, I don't want them to be like, oh, they're Kiaras, you know, because they're not, you know. So also like thinking about that, and you know, I feel like maybe they might make a rare appearance eventually, like later on. But I think for now, like that body of work is complete. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I when I saw them, and I like the fact that they were hidden, right? Like, and I think Fatima explained to me sort of the significance you just were talking about, and to me it was just like amazing. I was like, I like the fact that they're hidden, and sometimes they show up, or it's like you kind of have to find them in some of your larger works. And I was like, oh yeah, there you see them, and so colorful, and the fact that they are warrior dolls, right? It's like, it has this sort of other representation when you put that meaning of like Central America behind it, right? And I thought that was just so fascinating to think about, and just thinking about, I was like, do Central Americans worry? I mean, I think we all worry as maybe humans, but to think about that sort of erasure and invisibility that is often sort of we're relegated to, right? Because of various reasons, but yeah, I thought that subtle statement to me was like, oh yes, like this is, it's speaking to me, right? Exactly what we've been talking about. It's like art that speaks to you. Because I definitely felt that, I felt it, my life as well, right? Just knowing that, again, we're often mistaken for other sort of Latino, subjects or people from other parts of Latin America, and it's like, oh no, we're Central American. It's something very specific, obviously, and to not be recognized, it's like, yeah, it's like maybe times are changing though, and I hope that times are changing because I know Central Americans are sort of more represented. I mean that's. Actually, that's probably not the right. They're represented often in like the wrong ways, right? It's like when we think about maras and so like people might know Central America, but they know the sort of not
in a
so
very
positive
particular light. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to also talk about your self-portraits. I noticed that that's sort of a theme that's been popping up more in your artwork. If you could talk about, why you decide to paint self-portraits.
Yeah, going through the arts program at Cal State Long Beach, we obviously had to draw or paint ourselves a lot. So I think that definitely also helped to view myself as non-objectively, right? Of like, because you have to, like just like look at shapes, and like you're drawing yourself so much that you don't even, I don't know, at least for myself, like I wasn't even like looking at myself, just more so like, oh, okay, like this shape here, like fix this and that. And also with that, I feel like with self-portraits, because when I'm painting other people, I want to be respectful, or like if I, normally I'll do an interview, and then based off that interview, I'll, come up with a sketch, but also like doing it collaboratively where I'm like sending them like the composition and the sketch. But for myself, I feel like I can be more critical, and I can cover more, maybe like more themes, or like more get into more deeper or even like heavier topics, because it is myself and it's not anybody else. So I'm able to like see myself objectively and like discuss like certain topics that, I probably wouldn't want to with other people because it's too personal or something like that. So I think with that, self-portraits allows myself to be more critical of myself.
Yeah, because I've just noticed they're also very intimate, right? Like I feel like they're like placed in intimate spaces, at least your own sort of self-portraits. And then that's where I get the sort of Central American iconography sometimes popping up, right, in different aspects. To me, there's just something very powerful about that, like being in these sort of intimate spaces that you're letting us, as the audience, as the viewer, go into. But that's sort of, I guess the power of self-portraits. I think a lot of artists have painted self-portraits, and to me, it's always fascinating to sort of see what is included in the self-portrait, because it's the self-portrait of an artist. So it's like, am I deciding to sort of share with the viewers? And yeah, I always think there's something very intimate there. So thank you for letting us in.
Of course. Yeah. I think especially coming out of the pandemic too, right? Where I was like what other subject matter do I have but myself, right? And so it was like, coming up with all these thoughts and ideas. And for most of my pieces, I'm never really planning on showing them, right? I just like make pieces, and then if an opportunity comes about, which I think also helps me to be a little more vulnerable with certain pieces, because I'm like, oh, this one's never going to be seen. Um, it really allows me to like go into something that I wouldn't really like normally do. And I guess that's like the part of like experimentation, or yeah, being able to be vulnerable in my pieces where in other parts I'm not at all. And it also like making the painting allows me to, or forces me to also have to explain that or like talk about my work. Instead of like it all makes sense in my head, but then when I'm like trying to verbalize it, it also allows me, to like really contextualize what I'm trying to say. So I think that also helps too, right? Because sometimes I'm like, I have this idea, but I don't know how to say it. So I'll do it visually first and then like just stare at it and then like practice talking about it. And then I think that really helps me to also have that dialogue with like these self portraits.
Excellent. And then, so to wrap up, I want to end it on this. I mean, this might be really challenging. I know if you pose this question to me, it'd be kind of challenging. But I wanted to sort of wrap up and ask you, what artist, dead or alive, has influenced you the most?
I think definitely one of the ones when I was younger was Van Gogh, and I think also right with like all the dead white artists, I feel like he was still like a real one. I think more so because of his suffering, and you can just like see it. And with that sense too, I or like with Fauvism too, right? Of like just the colors being like flipped, like it's like someone's face is blue. I took a lot of inspiration with that within my own work, but with like Van Gogh too, right, where it was like just really sad, but all this like texture was so beautiful. So also like, how do you, I guess like talking about like a sad portrait, but also being able to explain it in a beautiful manner. I thought that was like so interesting. So trying to transfer that too with like my own work, where like sometimes it's like really heavy topics, but then like the color, you could still, by still explaining of like, but this brushstroke is still very beautiful. Like I think that's so interesting to me, of like having this like dichotomy of, um, kind of like polar opposites, right? Something that's like heavy that you can still explain as like the brushstroke is so beautiful, or like thinking about the psychology behind that. But yeah, Van Gogh, I think like since a child, I think like through and through, I really enjoyed his work versus like other white artists where like as a young child I liked, and then I like grew up and found out stuff about them. And I was like, oh, well, they're out. And then obviously Kerry James Marshall, love him. Bisa Butler, because I've been wanting to incorporate more sewing into my work, or kind of go more into installation, or again go beyond the stretcher bars, which I've kind of slowly done. But also kind of thinking about like my grandma sewing. I really love Bisa Butler's work, and also again she also works with like multiple colors on like the skin, like fuchsia as like a skin color, like blues, and like patterns on patterns, which I also do a lot with like texture on texture. So yeah, drawing a lot of inspiration from them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing details of your own story and process as an artist. Do you have any social media handles where people can reach out or view your work?
Yeah, I just have Instagram, which is my first name, Kiara, Kiara _Aileen, AILEEN _arts, ARTS.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our show. Thank you for being part of this, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.